The rain wasn't heavy, just a soft, steady drizzle that clung to everything it touched. It was the kind of morning that made sidewalks glisten and car windows fog up from the inside. In a quiet neighborhood just off a main road in Los Angeles, most people were still asleep or rushing to work, eyes glued to their phones, minds already tangled in the day ahead. But near the edge of a small park, tucked between a laundromat and a closed bookstore, an old silver sedan sat parked under a street lamp, its tires worn, its paint dull with age. Inside, a young woman sat curled in the back seat, wrapped in a thick blanket. Her baby, no more than a few months old, slept peacefully in a car seat beside her, swaddled in a clean onesie and a soft receiving blanket. The car wasn't much, but it was dry, and it was theirs, for now. She'd kept it tidy. A small cooler, held bottles of formula and a few jars of baby food. A backpack hung from the headrest with diapers and wipes neatly stacked, and a folded yoga mat served as a makeshift mattress. Everything had a place. Order was the only thing she could control. She hadn't always lived like this. Just 8 months ago, she'd worked full-time at a dental office, rented a one-bedroom apartment with decent light, and dreamed of saving enough to move closer to her sister. But when her daycare provider suddenly closed, everything unraveled. She couldn't afford backup care, missed too many shifts, and was let go. The rent piled up. One missed payment turned into 2, then 3. The eviction notice came on a Tuesday. She packed what she could into her car and drove until she found a spot that felt safe enough to stay. Now every morning began the same way. Check the baby's temperature, warm a bottle using a portable heater plugged into the car's cigarette lighter, and scan the street for any sign of trouble. She avoided eye contact with strangers, kept the doors locked, and never parked in the same place 2 nights in a row. Pride had long since given way to survival, but dignity, that she held on to fiercely. She washed her baby's clothes by hand, in gas station sinks, brushed her own hair every morning, and always made sure the car smelled like lavender, not desperation. This particular morning, though, felt heavier. The rain had soaked through a crack in the windshield seal overnight, leaving a damp patch on the blanket. The car battery was weak. She'd had to jump-start it twice in the past week, and the baby had been fussier than usual, as if sensing the weight in the air. She rocked gently, humming a lullaby her own mother used to sing, hoping to soothe them both. Outside, footsteps crunched on wet pavement. She tensed, pulling the blanket tighter. Through the fogged glass, she saw a figure approaching, a man walking a dog, hood up against the drizzle. He moved slowly, without hurry, letting the dog sniff at a fire hydrant. She held her breath, watching. Most people didn't notice cars like hers. If they did, they looked away quickly, as if poverty were contagious. But this man stopped. Not right next to the car, just a few feet away near the curb. Near the A, he glanced toward the sedan, then crouched down to adjust his dog's leash. For a moment, she thought he'd keep walking. But then he stood, turned, and looked directly at the car. Not with suspicion or judgment, but with something quieter. Concern, maybe. Her heart pounded. She considered locking the doors again, even though they already were. But before she could react, he took a step closer and knocked lightly on the passenger window. She hesitated, then rolled it down just a few inches. Cold, air rushed in, carrying the scent of wet earth and coffee. "Hey," he said softly. His voice was calm, low, no performance in it, no agenda. "You okay in there?" She nodded quickly, too quickly. "Yeah, we're fine." He didn't push, just held out a thermos. "It's hot coffee, black but strong. Thought you might need it." She stared at the thermos, then at his face. He wasn't smiling broadly or trying to charm her. He just stood there, patient, like he'd do the same for anyone caught in the rain. After a beat, she reached through the crack and took it. The metal was warm in her hands. "Thank you," she whispered. "No problem." He paused, glancing at the baby who had begun to stir. "You need anything else? Blanket? Charger? I live nearby." She shook her head, eyes stinging, not from the cold, but from the unexpected kindness. We're managing. He nodded as if he understood exactly what managing really meant. Then he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small notepad, tore off a corner, scribbled something, and handed it through the window. If you change your mind, if you need help with anything at all, call this number, anytime. She took the scrap of paper. His handwriting was neat, just a string of digits. No name, no title, just a number. Why? She asked, before she could stop herself. He shrugged, almost shyly. Because everyone deserves a little help sometimes doesn't mean you're weak, just means you're human. The dog tugged gently on the leash, and he gave a small wave before turning to go. She watched him walk, away, shoulders relaxed, hands in his pockets, disappearing around the corner like he hadn't just handed her a lifeline. Inside the car, the baby let out a soft coo. She unscrewed the thermos and took a sip. The coffee was bitter, perfect, warming her from the inside out. For the first time in weeks, she didn't feel invisible. She looked down at the napkin in her hand. The number was real. She could feel it. But calling it? That felt like stepping off a cliff. What if it was a trick? What if he expected something in return? She'd learned the hard way that kindness often came with strings, yet he hadn't asked for her name, hadn't taken a photo, hadn't even told her his own. She tucked the paper into her wallet right behind her last bus pass, not because she planned to use it, but because for once, someone had seen her. Not the car, not the situation, not the label of homeless. Just her, a tired mother doing her best. Outside, the rain slowed to a mist. The streetlight flickered off as dawn broke through the clouds. She leaned back, cradling her baby close, and let herself breathe. Maybe, just maybe, things could get better. And for the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to hope, quietly, carefully, that they might. The scrap of paper stayed in her wallet for 3 days. She'd pull it out every evening after the baby fell asleep, stare at the numbers, then tuck it back in. Part of her wanted to call. Desperately. The car's battery had died completely, the night before, and she'd spent hours pushing it to a gas station just to jump-start it again. Her back ached, her eyes burned from lack of sleep, and the thought of another freezing night in the back seat made her stomach twist. But pride was a stubborn thing. She'd always prided herself on handling things alone. Asking for help felt like admitting defeat. Still, the memory of that quiet voice in the rain wouldn't leave her. There'd been no pity in his eyes, just simple, steady concern. Like he'd seen her not as a problem to be fixed, but as a person worth noticing. On the 4th morning, the baby woke up with a fever. Her heart dropped. The little one was flushed, fussy, refusing the bottle. She checked the temperature with a cheap drugstore thermometer, 101.2. Not dangerously high, but enough to worry. She didn't have insurance anymore, and the nearest free clinic had a 2-week wait. Panic clawed at her throat. She paced the length of the car, rocking the baby, whispering reassurances she didn't fully believe. That's when she made the call. Her hands shook as she dialed. Each ring felt like a drumbeat in her chest. She almost hung up on the 3rd ring, but then a calm, familiar voice answered. Hello? She swallowed hard. Hi, you gave me your number a few days ago, by the park, with the dog. A pause. Then gently, yeah, I remember. Are you okay? The kindness in his voice cracked something open inside her. She tried to keep her voice steady, but it wavered. My baby's sick, not terrible, but I don't know what to do. The car's not reliable, and I can't get to a clinic easily, and... She stopped, embarrassed by the rush of words. You don't have to figure it all out alone, he said. No judgment, just fact. He asked a few quiet questions, how high the fever was, if the baby was eating, if she had any medicine. Then he said, There's a place not far from you, clean, safe. I'll make a call. They'll have a room ready. Just drive there, tell them your name at the front desk. She blinked. But I can't afford... It's taken care of, he interrupted softly. No questions. Just get your little one somewhere warm. She wanted to argue, to insist. She could manage, but the baby whimpered in her arms, and the weight of the last few months crashed over her. Okay, she whispered. Thank you. He gave her the address, a modest motel on the edge of town, the kind with flickering neon signs and rooms rented by the week. She'd passed it before, never imagining she'd be walking through its doors. 20 minutes later, she pulled into the parking lot. The car sputtered as she turned it off, but she didn't care. She bundled the baby in layers, grabbed the essentials, and walked inside. The lobby was quiet. A woman behind the desk looked up, then smiled. You must be her, she said, as if expecting her. Room 12, it's paid for 2 weeks. If you need more time, just let us know. No paperwork, no interrogation, just a key and a nod. The room was small but spotless. 2 beds, a mini fridge, a bathroom with hot water. She sank onto the edge of the bed, tears finally spilling over. For the first time in months, she didn't have to listen for car doors slamming or worry about someone peering in. She ran a warm bath for the baby, gave her children's fever, reducer from the small first aid kit the front desk had handed her, and held her close as she drifted off to sleep. Later that night, wrapped in a clean towel, she sat by the window watching the streetlights flicker on. She thought about the man who'd helped her. She still didn't know his name, and he hadn't asked for hers. There was something powerful in that anonymity, not because it hid who they were, but because it stripped everything down to the act itself. No fame, no expectation, just one human reaching out to another. Over the next few days, the baby's fever broke. Color returned to her cheeks. She started smiling again, cooing at the ceiling fan like it was the most fascinating thing in the world. And the mother? She slept, deep, dreamless sleep that left her feeling almost like herself again. On the 5th morning, she walked to a nearby grocery store and bought real coffee, fruit, and oatmeal. Small luxuries, but they felt like victory. Back in the room, she wrote a note on the back of a receipt. Thank you. You gave us more than a room. You gave us hope. She didn't send it. Not yet. She wanted to earn her way forward, not just receive help. But she kept the note tucked in her journal, a promise to herself. Then on the 7th day, a knock came at the door. She tensed. Old habits died hard. But it was just a man in a delivery uniform holding a small box. For you? He said, handing it over. Inside was a brand new car battery, a prepaid gas card, and a note in the same neat handwriting, so you don't have to push anymore. She stared at it, stunned. He hadn't shown up, hadn't made a scene, just quietly removed one more weight from her shoulders. That afternoon, she called the motel manager. Is there any way I can extend my stay? She asked. I'm looking for work. I just need a little more time to get on my feet. The manager smiled. Actually, someone already covered another week, and there's something else. She handed her a flyer. A job training center downtown has an opening for an admin assistant, part-time with childcare support. They said to tell you to come in tomorrow. Her breath caught. She knew who'd arranged it. Again, no fanfare. Just a door quietly opened. The next morning, she dressed carefully. Clean jeans, a soft sweater, her hair pulled back neatly. She strapped the baby into the car seat, now powered by a strong, reliable battery, and drove to the center. The interview wasn't fancy, just a small office with a kind woman who asked about her experience, her goals, her challenges. She didn't sugarcoat it. She told the truth, about losing her job, about living in the car, about how hard she'd fought to keep her child safe. The woman listened without flinching. Then she said, "We've all been knocked down. What matters is how you get back up." 2 days later, she got the job. It wasn't glamorous, filing, answering phones, helping schedule appointments, but it came with a steady paycheck, health coverage for the baby, and access to subsidized daycare 2 blocks away. For the first time in nearly a year, she could see a path forward. That night, back in the motel room, she sat on the bed and cried, not from sadness, but from relief so deep it felt like healing. She looked at her sleeping child, then at the note in her journal. She still didn't know his name, and maybe she never would. But she knew this. Kindness didn't have to be loud to be powerful. Sometimes it was just a thermos of coffee, a room on a rainy night, or a battery that let you start your car without fear. And sometimes, that was enough to change everything. The first day at the new job felt like stepping onto solid ground after months of walking on shifting sand. The office was small, tucked above a bakery that filled the stairwell with the smell of cinnamon and warm bread. Her desk sat near a window that looked out onto a busy sidewalk, and for the first time in a long while, she didn't feel like she was hiding. She wore her best blouse, one she'd washed by hand and hung to dry in the motel bathroom, and kept her shoulders back. Even when her hands trembled a little while typing, the team was kind without being overly curious. No one asked where she'd been living or why she'd been out of work. They just showed her how to use the phone system, introduced her to the coffee maker, and let her find her rhythm. At lunch, someone brought her a plate of leftovers from the staff fridge. "You look like you could use a real meal," they said with a smile. She ate it slowly, savoring every bite, not just because it was good, but because it felt like belonging. The daycare center 2 blocks away became her second home. It was clean, bright, and run by women who spoke softly and knew every child's favorite toy. On her first drop-off, she lingered by the door, heart pounding, watching as her baby was gently taken into a circle of tiny chairs and picture books. But within minutes, the little one was laughing at a puppet show, completely at ease. That moment, seeing her child safe, happy, and cared for, was worth more than any paycheck. Still, life wasn't suddenly easy. She woke before dawn to get ready, walked the baby to daycare, worked her shift, picked her up, cooked a simple dinner in the motel microwave, and collapsed into bed long before midnight. But now exhaustion felt different. It wasn't the heavy, hopeless kind that came from fighting just to survive. This was the tiredness of someone building something. Meanwhile, across town, the man who'd helped her stayed out of sight. He went about his days, meetings, errands, quiet walks with his dog, never mentioning the encounter to anyone. But he hadn't forgotten. Through a contact at a nonprofit that supported working parents, he'd quietly recommended her for the job, not because he expected anything in return, but because he'd seen her strength. He knew that with just a little stability, she'd do the rest herself. A few weeks into her new routine, a local news blog ran a blurry photo of him near the motel, captioned with wild speculation, "Is Keanu Reeves secretly housing the homeless?" The story blew up online for a day or two. Fans theorizing, critics calling it a publicity stunt. But he never confirmed or denied anything. His team issued a short statement. He believes in helping where he can, quietly and without fanfare. Then the story faded, replaced by flashier headlines. She saw the article, though. Scrolling through her phone during a lunch break, she froze when she saw the photo. There he was, the same calm eyes, the same worn jacket. Her breath caught. So that was who he was. Not just a kind stranger, but someone the whole world knew, and yet he'd treated her like any other person on a rainy morning. No cameras, no grand speech, just coffee and a number. The realization didn't make her feel small. If anything, it made his kindness feel even bigger. Fame could have made him distant, guarded. Instead, he'd chosen to see her. Back at work, she threw herself into every task. She organized filing systems that had been chaotic for years, stayed late to help prepare for a community outreach event, and even suggested a new way to track client appointments that saved the office hours each week. Her supervisor noticed. "You've got a real knack for this," she said one afternoon. "Ever think about taking a certification course? We could help cover part of it." The idea lit something in her. Education had always been a dream she'd put on hold. Now with steady income and childcare, it felt possible again. She signed up for night classes in administrative management at the local community college. The schedule was tight. Work until 5, daycare pickup, dinner, then class 2 nights a week, but she didn't mind. Every hour felt like a step toward a future she could be proud of. One evening, after class, she stopped by a stationery store and bought a nice card. She sat at the small table in her motel room, baby asleep in the crib beside her, and wrote carefully, "Thank you for seeing me when I felt invisible. Because of you, we have a home, a job, and hope. I'm working hard to make it last. With gratitude." She didn't know his address, but she remembered the name of his production company from an old interview she'd once read. She sealed the envelope, wrote "For Keanu" on the front, and dropped it in the mailbox the next morning. She didn't expect a reply. She just needed him to know that his quiet act had mattered, deeply. At the shelter where she'd once been turned away, Told they had no room, no resources, she started volunteering on her Sundays off. She helped sort donations, played with kids while parents met with caseworkers, and sometimes just sat with women who looked as tired as she once had. She never gave advice unless asked. Mostly she just listened, because she knew what it felt like to be seen. One afternoon, a young woman with a toddler on her hip whispered, "How did you get out of it?" "Living in your car, I mean." She didn't offer a magic solution. "One day at a time," she said. "And someone who believed I deserved a chance." She didn't mention his name. That part wasn't hers to share, but she made sure the woman left with a warm coat, a bus pass, and the shelter's updated list of job programs. Back at the motel, now extended to a full month, she hung a small shelf above the bed. On it, she placed a framed photo of her and the baby, a smooth stone she'd found in the park, and the original scrap of paper with his number. Not as a keepsake of charity, but as a reminder, kindness exists, and sometimes it arrives on an ordinary morning, wrapped in nothing but a thermos and a quiet voice. She still didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long time it felt wide open. Not because someone had fixed her life, but because someone had helped her believe she could fix it herself. And that, she realized, was the greatest gift of all. Life had a way of settling into rhythm once the storm passed. The motel room was no longer a temporary refuge, but a launching pad. Every morning now began with sunlight through clean curtains, the soft babble of her baby in the crib, and the quiet hum of a life being rebuilt. She'd moved into a small studio apartment 2 blocks from work, modest, with peeling paint and a kitchenette that barely fit 2 plates, but it had a lock on the door, a working stove, and a window that opened to fresh air. It was hers, and that made all the difference. At the job training center, her role had quietly expanded. She wasn't just answering phones anymore. She helped new clients fill out forms, walked them through the childcare application process, and even started leading a weekly support circle for parents re-entering the workforce. Her own experience gave her words weight. When she said, "I've been where you are," people believed her. They leaned in. They stayed. The center's director took notice. "You've got a gift for this," she said one afternoon, handing her a folder. "We're applying for a grant to expand our childcare program. I'd like you to help write the proposal, especially the part about real-life impact." She hesitated. "Me? I'm not a writer." "You're someone who lived it," came the reply. "That's worth more than any fancy degree." So she stayed late, drafting paragraphs between feeding the baby and reviewing class notes. She wrote about the fear of not knowing where you'd sleep, the shame of asking for help, the relief of a warm room and a safe place for your child. She didn't dramatize it. She just told the truth. And when the grant was approved, bringing in funding for 3 more childcare slots and extended hours, she cried in the supply closet. Not from sadness, but from the quiet joy of knowing she'd helped others avoid the nights she'd endured. Meanwhile, far from the headlines, the man who'd first offered help continued his quiet work. He'd always supported causes behind the scenes: homelessness, youth education, mental health. But after that rainy morning, he'd quietly doubled his contributions to family-focused housing initiatives. He never mentioned the encounter, not even to close friends. To him, it wasn't a story. It was just what you did when you saw someone struggling. Still, his team noticed a shift. He began asking more questions about wraparound support, childcare, job placement, trauma-informed care, not just emergency shelter. "He wants to fix the system, not just patch it," one staffer said during a planning meeting. Donations increased. Partnerships formed. But all of it happened without press releases or photo ops, just steady, thoughtful action. Back in the city, the online rumors about him had long since faded. The internet had moved on to newer scandals and flashier stars. But at the shelter and the job center, a different kind of story was being passed around, quietly, respectfully. Not about fame, but about how one small act of seeing someone can ripple outward in ways no one expects. She never spoke his name in public. Not out of secrecy, but out of respect. What happened between them belonged to that rainy morning, to the dignity of a private moment. But she did share the lesson, that help doesn't have to be loud to be powerful. That sometimes the most profound kindness is the kind that asks for nothing in return. One Saturday, she stood at a community fundraiser in a local church basement. Folding chairs, donated pastries, a microphone that kept cutting out. She'd been asked to say a few words, not as a success story, but as someone who'd walked the path and wanted others to know it wasn't impossible. She held her baby on her hip and spoke simply. "I used to think asking for help meant I'd failed," she said, voice steady. "But I was wrong. Asking for help meant I was still fighting, and sometimes all it takes is one person who sees you. Not your situation, not your car, not your clothes, but you. And that's enough to start over." Afterward, a woman approached her, eyes red-rimmed but determined. "I've been sleeping in my van with my son," she whispered. "I didn't think anyone would understand." "I do," she said, and handed her a card with the job center's number. "Call them Monday. Tell them I sent you." That night, back in her apartment, she found a small envelope in her mailbox. No return address. Inside was a note, "So proud of you. Keep going." She knew the handwriting instantly. She didn't write back. She didn't need to. Instead, she taped the note to her fridge right next to her class schedule and a drawing the baby had made with chunky crayons. It wasn't about staying in touch. It was about carrying the spirit of that first kindness forward. And she was. She'd started saving for a used car, something reliable, with a backseat big enough for a car seat and groceries. She'd enrolled in a financial literacy workshop. She'd even signed up for a weekend parenting class, not because she thought she was doing it wrong, but because she wanted to do it better. Her baby was walking now, wobbly steps across the linoleum floor, arms outstretched, giggling every time she reached the couch. Each milestone felt like a victory, not just for her child, but for both of them. They'd made it through the dark, and now they were learning how to live in the light. One evening, as she washed dishes and watched the sunset through the kitchen window, she thought about how far they'd come. Not because someone swooped in and fixed everything, but because someone had handed her a handhold when she was slipping, and she'd used it to climb. The world liked stories with heroes and grand rescues. But real life was quieter. It was coffee on a rainy morning, a room when you had nowhere to go, a job when you needed purpose, a note that said you matter, and sometimes that was more than enough. 1 year after that rainy morning, the city felt different, not because it had changed, but because she had. The same streets that once seemed cold and indifferent now held small landmarks of progress. The bus stop where she'd waited with her baby wrapped in a blanket, the laundromat where she'd washed clothes at midnight, the park bench where she'd once sat too exhausted to move. Now, she walked those paths with her head up, her child's hand in hers, a reusable grocery bag slung over her shoulder. She'd been promoted at the job center, not to a flashy title, but to a role that let her shape the program she once relied on. She helped design a new intake process that asked fewer judgmental questions and offered more immediate support. She pushed for a quiet room where parents could nurse or calm an upset child without feeling watched, and every time a new face walked in, tired, wary, holding everything they owned in a backpack, she made sure they were greeted with the same quiet dignity someone had once shown her. Her apartment was still small, but it was full of life. Colorful drawings taped to the fridge, a second-hand bookshelf crammed with library books, a tiny potted plant on the windowsill that somehow kept blooming. She'd bought a real bed, second-hand but sturdy, and her baby had her own crib now, painted soft yellow. On weekends, they went to the public library, the farmer's market, sometimes just sat on a bench and watched pigeons strut across the sidewalk. Simple things, precious things. She still saved every spare dollar, still packed lunches to stretch the budget, but there was no panic in it anymore. Just planning, patience, and the quiet confidence that tomorrow would be manageable. One afternoon, she saw a short interview clip online. He was being asked about compassion in a world that often felt harsh. He didn't mention her, didn't mention any specific act, but he said something that stayed with her. "We're all just people trying to get through the day. Sometimes the smallest thing, a coffee, a listen, can change everything." She smiled. He was right. And he'd never even known how true those words were for her. Later that week, she received a letter from the community college. She'd passed her certification exam with honors. The program coordinator wrote that they'd love to have her as a guest speaker for incoming students, especially those balancing school with parenting. She accepted immediately, not for the recognition, but because she wanted them to know. Your past doesn't get to write your future unless you let it. The day she walked into that classroom, her baby in a carrier on her chest, she felt a familiar flutter of nerves, but as she spoke, about late-night study sessions after bedtime, about choosing between bus fare and groceries, about the shame that almost kept her from asking for help. The room grew still. And when she finished, a young woman in the back raised her hand and said, "I'm living in my aunt's garage right now. Do you think I can really do this?" "Yes," she said without hesitation. "You already are." After class, she stopped by the old park, the one near the laundromat and the closed bookstore. She hadn't been back since that first morning. The silver sedan was long gone, towed or sold for scrap. But the bench where he'd stood with his dog was still there. She sat down, her child toddling ahead to chase a fallen leaf. The sun was warm, the air crisp. For a moment, she let herself remember the fear, the exhaustion, the feeling of being invisible, and then she let it go. Not because it didn't matter, but because it no longer defined her. As she stood to leave, she noticed a car parked near the curb. Older model, windows fogged, a baby's car seat visible in the back. Her steps slowed. She watched as a young woman inside shifted, trying to soothe a crying infant. The scene was achingly familiar. Without thinking, she turned and walked to the corner cafe she now frequented. She ordered 2 hot drinks, 1 black coffee, 1 chamomile tea, and a plain muffin. Then she walked back, heart pounding just a little, and tapped gently on the passenger window. The woman inside looked up, eyes wide with caution. Slowly, she rolled the window down a few inches. "Hi," she said softly, holding out the cup and the paper bag. "It's cold out. Thought you might need this." The woman stared, then glanced at the baby, then back at her. "Why?" she whispered. "Because someone once did the same for me," she replied. And it made all the difference. She didn't give her number. Didn't ask for a name. Just offered kindness, plain and simple, the way it had been given to her. As she walked away, her child reaching for her hand, she felt something settle inside her. Not closure, exactly, but continuity. The circle wasn't closed. It was still turning, and now she was part of keeping it going. Back home that evening, she opened her journal, the same one that once held desperate notes and job applications, and wrote a single line. Help isn't about fixing someone. It's about reminding them they're not alone. She didn't know if he'd ever read her thank you note. Didn't know if he ever thought about that morning. But it didn't matter. What mattered was that the kindness had landed, and that she was now strong enough to pass it on. The world loved stories with heroes in capes or celebrities making grand gestures. But real change rarely happened that way. It happened in quiet moments between strangers and parking lots over a cup of coffee. It happened when someone chose to see another person, truly see them and act like it mattered. And sometimes, that was enough to rebuild a life. Later that night, as she tucked her child into bed and kissed her forehead, she whispered, "We made it, baby." Outside, the city hummed with its usual noise. Cars, distant sirens, laughter from a nearby balcony. But inside there was peace. Not because everything was perfect, but because they were safe. They were seen. And they were moving forward, one small, steady step at a time.